Hi everyone. We're going to do a few lessons on rhythm. Now, music is something that happens over time. So to be able to do anything musical, you really have to have at least a basic understanding of rhythm. And it's one of the most difficult things to get a grasp on. So I'm going to show you how to read and write rhythm. I'll cover things like note values, rests, time signatures, all that good stuff. But I'm really interested in the fundamentals, how you make things fit and sound good rhythmically. We're going to start by looking at a timeline. So let's say our song begins here, goes on and ends somewhere way over there. Now any note you play has to happen somewhere along this timeline. But if we place notes randomly, we wouldn't get anything recognizable. We get that toddler on a drum set kind of sound. But if we use relationships and put things into patterns and make things repetitive, we get what we usually think of as rhythm. So every note is going to have a beginning and an end. I'm going to represent the beginning with this little dot. Okay, this line will last for this long, then it'll stop with this little vertical line. This is not some standard musical notation here. This is just something I've made up, but I think it helps to illustrate how the rhythms work. So let's say we're going to look at a series of notes. We have this one to start, and right as soon as this one ends, we have another note that begins, and that one lasts for just as long. Then we have another note. This one lasts for twice as long, ends over here, and we would assume something else happens, but we'll just deal with this little series of notes for now. Now you're going to measure note length using something we call a beat. We'll talk more about the details later, but for now, let's say a beat is exactly this long. Now this is just a length of time, and we're going to use that beat to measure out all the notes in the song. So the first note would last for exactly one beat. This next note would last for one beat. And then since this one is twice as long, this note here will last for two. Now the obvious question is, how long does a beat last for? And for now, let's just assume that this lasts for half of a second. That's a nice moderate speed for a beat. Now a beat could be all different lengths of time. But for now, let's just say half of a second. We'll get into using beats of longer length or shorter length later. Now, if you were to try to play this series of notes, you're not going to be thinking in your head, this note lasts for half of a second, this one lasts for half of a second, this one lasts for a full second. You're just going to have a general sense of how long this time interval is. And this will be obvious in a minute too. So if I plotted out the beats here, they would line up with the notes like this. First beat would begin right here. Second beat would begin right here. The first one would be ending. Third beat would begin here. Fourth beat would be right halfway through this note. And the fifth beat would be right here. And we'll assume this keeps going for the rest of the song. So if we want a way to actually play this rhythm, I need a way of measuring these beats out. And I need a way of hearing it, not just seeing it. So whenever a beat begins, I'll count with a number. So right in here, I'll count with the number 1. So it'll be 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that should cover this little note sequence. So when I say 1, I'm beginning this first note. And it's going to be right as I say 1. I'm marking the very beginning of this beat. When I say 2, the first beat is ended, the second beat is started, so I begin that second note. When I say 3, the third note starts. When I say 4, this third note is just holding out. When I get to 5, this one ends. So if I were to play this, it would sound just like this. And I would be counting it out loud. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And 5 is when that note stops. So when I count this, I'm just estimating in my head how long these beats are, but it's not hard to make sure they're all the same length. If I were to count irregularly, like this, let's say I did this badly, I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's obviously not even beats, and that's not what I want. So when you're counting out rhythms on your own, you're making sure you keep things smooth and consistent. That's the idea, is that all these beats are the same length. So I could count out a whole song's worth of notes this way, and even though it wouldn't be very interesting yet, it would at least be musical. It wouldn't sound like noise anymore. So that's a step in terms of getting good rhythm. But obviously there's still a lot missing. For one, if I counted a song this way, eventually I'd get to 247, 248, and that would start to get really awkward. But even more importantly, we want things to be pattern-like and repetitive. We want things grouped together. So rather than just string all this out in a big long line, I'm going to group the beats in sets of 4. So when I count, I'll count to 4, then start over at 1 and count through the entire song this way. So this would become 1, this would be 2, and as I count this, I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I move through the whole song just like that, only ever getting up to 4. Now, you refer to this grouping as a measure. Get rid of this. So a measure would start here, go all the way up to the end of beat 4 and end right here. This would be the first measure, so measure 1. And then the next measure would begin here, go all the way out to the end of beat 4, and that would be measure 2. And the entire song would fit into measures just like that. Everything would be grouped in groups of 4. Now, we could actually make the measures in groups of 3 or 2 or really whatever we wanted to, but grouping things in groups of 4 is the most common, so we'll stick with that for now. We'll get into time signatures pretty soon, and that will kind of show a lot of different ways of grouping measures out. So let's shrink this down for a minute. I want to see a few measures sort of all strung together. So let's say I'm writing out some notes here, a rhythm. I have my timeline again. And now everything got shrunken down, so the beat is this long. So first note would start here, would last for 1 beat. We have that. Next note would start another 1 beat note. Let's say we have a 2 beat note. And all total, this is 1, this is 1, this is 2. If I put the beats in here, or counted them out, I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So when I get to the end here, I've just completed 1 measure. So I would start again on 1. This note is ending, the next note is beginning. Let's say this one is a 2 beat note, then this one's a 2 beat note. So that would be 4 total. Be counting 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 again, so the measure ends, the next one begins. Let's say all of these are just 1 beat notes. Like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1 starts the next part. And let's just leave it at that for now. So I would have 3 measures here. Measure 1, measure 2, and measure 3. And if I played it, it would sound like this. And I'm just picking a random note here to show you this on. But this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1 is where this ends, and we'd assume that the song would keep going. So at this point, I can count out and play a rhythm. I can play notes that have different legs, and even if it's boring, the music actually has some structure now. I'm going to stop things here and let that sink in. Obviously, things are still very stale and boring, and I haven't even touched on actual note values or time signatures. So I'll start working on that next, but I strongly recommend spending a little time practicing counting and playing notes with a steady rhythm. Even though this first part seems simple, things get complicated fast, so make sure you're comfortable before going on.